Before we begin, take a breath. This isn't just a podcast, it's a new way to think, speak, and live in English. Welcome to Coffluent Podcast, where words flow, confidence grows, and every sip brings you closer to fluency.
I love that intro.
Yeah, it really sets the tone. So, I want you to imagine something for a second. You are sitting at a coffee shop, okay?
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You're just trying to enjoy a quiet morning. Your newborn baby is resting right next to you, and suddenly, a woman you have never seen before in your life walks right up to your table.
Oh, no.
She picks up your baby without saying a single word
Yeah.
and just walks straight out the front door.
That is terrifying.
Right. What do? Do you tackle her? Do you, call the SWAT team? Or do you just take another sip of your coffee and let her go?
I think my Western programming would definitely choose the SWAT team.
Exactly. But today, we are jumping into a deep dive that completely shattered my perspective on all of this. We're talking about community, resilience, and what it actually takes to build a functioning human being.
Yeah, we are looking at this fascinating recorded conversation between two American expats.
Right, the dads.
Exactly. One of them has established his life in Indonesia, specifically Bali, and the other is based over in Japan. And the both became fathers relatively late in life.
Which is a huge factor here.
Huge factor. And they are raising their kids entirely outside the standard Western bubble. It really forces this direct daily comparison between the hyper-individualistic American way of doing things and the deeply communal Asian cultures they're suddenly immersed in.
So that coffee shop scenario I mentioned, that actually happened to one of them in Indonesia.
Wait, really? A stranger just walked off with his baby?
A complete stranger.
Yeah.
And operating on pure American instinct, the dad thought his child was being abducted. I mean, of course he did.
Obviously.
So he goes into this full stealth mode, creeping out of the cafe, literally tracking this woman down the street. He is preparing to physically fight her to get his baby back.
Oh my gosh, the stress he must have felt.
Unbelievable stress. But he finally corners her, only to realize she's just standing in the sunlight.
Just standing there.
Yeah. She was taking the baby outside for jamur, which is, it's the local practice of getting morning vitamin D.
Oh, wow.
The community there just considers babies to be public domain.
That is so wild. I mean, his wife apparently just laughed at him when he came back all sweating and panicking.
Yeah, she thought it was hilarious.
Because to a Westerner, that woman crossed an unforgivable boundary, right? But to the local community, she was literally just doing her part. It highlights the fundamental thesis these two fathers arrive at, which is that the Western obsession with boundaries and independence might actually be, well, our greatest vulnerability.
Let's back up a bit, though. Let's talk about how they even got to this mindset, because their perspective is heavily influenced by the timeline of their lives.
Right, the late adopter thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They both had their first children around age 40 or 50.
Yeah.
And for decades, they actively avoided having kids.
They had all the standard excuses lined up.
Oh, yeah. But then they heard this one piece of advice. If you wait until you're ready, you'll never have a baby.
Which is very true.
So they took the plunge. But rather than feeling behind, they realized they possessed a massive advantage. They actually call it the late adopter advantage.
Yeah, they acknowledge a somewhat uncomfortable truth in the sources. They admit that if they had become fathers in their 20s, they would have been terrible at it.
Terribly impatient, probably.
Exactly. They simply lacked the neurological and emotional scaffolding back then. And it's interesting because historically, the human timeline looked very different.
Right.
For thousands of years, life expectancy hovered around 50, so people started families at 16 or 17. You were forced to compress your career building, family raising, and, personal exploration into this brutally short window.
You basically had to speed run the whole game.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy. Having kids in your 40s or 50s is kind of like skipping the chaotic tutorial level of a video game.
I like that.
Because today, the timeline is completely stretched out. People are in school until they are 25, paying off loans until they are 30, and trying to establish a career foothold until they were 35. You don't even feel like a fully actualized adult until midlife.
It's true.
So by the time the baby arrives for these guys, their contentment stats are already maxed out. They've traveled, they've been to the clubs, they've had the wild weekends. They are just done with that phase.
What's fascinating here is how that affects their parenting. The fear of missing out, that FOMO that plagues young parents, is completely absent for them.
Right, they aren't wishing they were somewhere else.
Exactly. When a 25-year-old is kept awake at 3 a.m. by a crying infant, a part of their brain is mourning the life they aren't living. They feel trapped, right? They feel like their exploratory years have been hijacked.
Which is totally understandable.
It is. But when a 45-year-old is awake at 3 a.m., they aren't longing to be at a bar. They have this baseline emotional regulation that only comes from having exhausted those earlier desires.
They aren't fighting their immediate circumstances. And that lowered baseline stress is what gives them the patience to handle the chaos.
And they really needed every ounce of that patience.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Because the culture shock of raising a child in an Asian village model is super jarring if you are programmed with American software.
It really is.
Let's dig into that coffee shop concept a bit more. Because, the idea of multiple generations sleeping in one bedroom or strangers handling your child, I have to admit, my Western programming completely rebels against that.
It's a lot to process.
I want my own house, my own walls, my own clear boundaries. Having my extended family or neighbors constantly in my space just sounds completely suffocating. Isn't the American way of having clear boundaries and privacy just better?
Well, that is definitely the standard reflex for us. We view boundaries as the ultimate metric of a healthy life, but let's look at the actual economics and sociology of this village model they're participating in. The expat in Indonesia casually mentions in the source that in the 8 years since his daughter was born, he has never once hired a babysitter.
Wait, not a single time in 8 years.
Not once.
That is practically science fiction in the United States.
Right. It's unheard of in the West because we have completely dismantled the village. In his community, the extended family and the neighbors handle childcare seamlessly.
Wow.
Kids just drift between houses, grandparents step in automatically. What you view as lack of boundaries, they view as an impenetrable safety net.
That's a huge perspective shift.
It is. Western culture has hyper-prioritized independence to an extreme degree. We put baby monitors in separate bedrooms from the day a child comes home from the hospital. The overarching goal of American parenting is basically to get the child out of the house by 18, fully self-sufficient and financially independent.
But look at the bill we are paying for that independence. We buy our privacy, but the receipt literally says isolation.
That's a great way to put it.
Modern parents are exhausted, heavily medicated, deeply lonely, and handing over massive portions of their income to commercial daycares. We traded a shared cultural and economic burden for the right to sit alone in our quiet, empty houses.
And it's crazy because multi-generational living used to be the absolute norm in North America, too.
Really?
Yeah. It wasn't until the post-war economic boom and the rise of the suburban single-family home that we decided success meant living in a silo. The psychological burden of that hyper-independence is staggering. When parents are isolated and stressed, they transmit that anxiety directly to the child.
So true. And that economic and psychological freedom of the village seems to be exactly what allows these dads to take massive risks with how they let their kids play.
Yes, exactly.
Because they aren't operating from a place of isolated panic, they're actively rejecting modern bubble-wrap parenting. And this is where their observations get incredibly sharp.
The outdoor stuff.
Yeah. One of the fathers is an outdoor adventure educator. He takes groups into the wilderness, and he notes that he is constantly dealing with these incredibly fragile 20-somethings from the city.
Yeah, he actually uses the word wimpy, which sounds super judgmental until you look at the mechanics of what he is describing.
Right.
These young adults have a razor-thin comfort zone. They whine when they have to walk up a slight incline. They panic if they are sweating. They just shut down if they encounter a bug.
A single bug and it's over.
Exactly. They have zero tolerance for physical discomfort because they have spent 2 decades inside what the sources call an air-conditioned box.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about your own day-to-day life. You wake up in a climate-controlled house, walk across a perfectly flat floor to a climate-controlled car, drive to a climate-controlled office, and maybe go to a climate-controlled gym to walk on a perfectly flat motorized treadmill.
It's also perfectly smooth.
We treat the human body like a delicate museum exhibit. But the sources bring up this fascinating observation from a chiropractor in Singapore that proves how destructive this is.
Oh, this part blew my mind.
This chiropractor is treating an absolute epidemic of young children with severe back problems.
Yeah.
And the culprit isn't heavy backpacks or anything like that.
No.
It's the ground they walk on.
Yeah, the biomechanics of this are fascinating. The human body evolved to walk on uneven terrain, right? Mud, rocks, roots, varying elevations.
Right, unpredictable surfaces.
Exactly. When you navigate uneven ground, the micromuscles in your feet, your ankles, and your lower back are forced to constantly fire and adjust. It builds a dynamic, resilient physical structure.
And what's happening in Singapore?
Well, these kids in Singapore have only ever walked on concrete sidewalks, perfectly smooth mall floors, and escalators.
So by removing all the literal bumps in the road,
Right.
we are destroying their structural integrity. Their physical muscles are atrophying because the environment is just too perfect. And it is not just their musculoskeletal system either. It is their immune system. These dads are intentionally making their kids eat dirt. They encourage them to grab rocks and put them in their mouths. They enforce a 5-second rule for dropped food and sometimes joke about extending it to a 1-minute rule.
Which sounds gross, but they are informally applying the hygiene hypothesis.
Okay, explain that.
To understand why eating dirt is actually beneficial, you have to look at how the immune system functions. Think of your immune system, specifically your T regulatory cells, as a machine learning algorithm.
Okay.
An algorithm is totally useless without data.
Right.
For millions of years, the data fed into the human immune system was soil bacteria, mild parasites, and everyday pathogens.
So the dirt is the data.
Precisely. The dirt is the data. The immune system uses that data to build a library of what is dangerous and what is benign.
Wow.
But in our modern, hyper-sterilized world where everything is wiped down with antibacterial bleach and kids are constantly using hand sanitizer, the immune system is starved of data.
It gets bored.
Yes. It gets bored, and a bored, untrained immune system starts hallucinating threats. It begins attacking completely harmless proteins, like those found in peanuts, dairy, or gluten.
Oh, that makes so much sense with the rise of allergies.
Exactly. We sterilize the world to keep children safe, but we accidentally reprogram their biology to be hyper-reactive and fragile.
That is such a powerful analogy. If you don't feed the algorithm data, it turns on itself. And I think that applies perfectly to the emotional immune system as well.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, absolutely.
By removing danger, dirt, and boredom, parents genuinely believe they are giving their kids an advantage. But they are creating adults who shatter under the slightest psychological pressure.
The dads talked at length about how heavily supervised modern childhood has become. Every single minute is optimized. Piano at 3.0, math tutoring at 4.0, and a heavily supervised playdate at 5.0 where a parent just hovers over the kids to make sure nobody gets their feelings hurt.
Which ruins it. The total eradication of unstructured, unsupervised play is completely devastating for the development of soft skills.
It really is.
When children are left completely alone in a backyard, when they are allowed to be profoundly bored, they are forced to construct their own reality. The sources highlight a great example of this. A child taking a stick and some tape and trying to build a bow and arrow.
And it inevitably fails, right?
Exactly. The tape doesn't hold, the stick snaps.
It fails repeatedly. But that micro-trauma of failure is the actual psychological scaffolding of resilience. Furthermore, when adults step back, kids have to invent games. They have to establish rules.
And argue over them.
Right. Within 5 minutes, they will be arguing, "You cheated," or "That's not fair." Without a hovering parent to step in and act as the Supreme Court justice, those children are forced to learn negotiation.
Right. They have to figure it out.
They learn how to read social cues, how to de-escalate conflict, and how to tolerate the sheer frustration of losing.
So when you buy a kid a pre-packaged game with rigid printed rules, or when you intervene to solve every single playground dispute, you are actively stealing their reps.
Stealing their reps, exactly.
You are robbing them of the chance to build that emotional muscle. So these fathers are pushing for free-range kids. Kids who are allowed to catch geckos, get scraped knees, and crash their bikes into the bushes.
Yeah, real freedom.
But here is where I get genuinely tripped up by their philosophy. There is a massive paradox in how they operate.
You're talking about the tension between their push for resilience and their actual daily habits.
Exactly. On one hand, you have this intense, rub some dirt on it approach. Like one of the dads enforces an anti-princess rule.
Sure, I remember that.
He actively refuses to call his daughter a princess or post cute photos highlighting her outfits online. He wants her valued entirely for her strength, her grit, and her character, not her fragility. He literally tells her to toughen up when she trips and falls.
So extreme toughness.
Extreme toughness. But at the exact same time, these are the same parents practicing intensive attachment parenting.
Which is fascinating. They are co-sleeping in the same bed every single night. They carry the children constantly, strapped to their chests or backs. They even feed the babies by hand, taking food from a shared family plate and placing it directly into the child's mouth with their fingers.
So, what does this all mean? That sounds completely contradictory to me.
It does seem that way.
You can't demand rugged independence and then hand-feed a child dinner in your own bed. Isn't that sending entirely mixed signals? You are telling them to be a lone wolf while simultaneously coddling them to an extreme degree.
It feels contradictory to a Western mind because we view independence as the opposite of attachment.
Right.
We think you create independence by pushing a child away, but psychologically, deep physical security is actually the prerequisite for genuine bravery.
Oh, interesting.
To understand the mechanism behind this, we have to look at the foundational science of attachment theory, specifically the Harlow monkey experiments from the mid-20th century.
Well, that's the study with the wire mothers, right?
Yes. Researchers took infant monkeys and gave them a choice between two artificial surrogates. One mother was constructed entirely of cold, bare wire, but it had a bottle of milk attached.
Oh, yeah.
The other mother offered zero food, but was covered in soft, warm terry cloth.
What did they find?
Well, the prevailing scientific theory of the time was that infants only attached to mothers for sustenance. Food was survival.
But the monkeys ignored the food.
Exactly. They overwhelmingly chose the cloth mother. They would dart over to the wire mother just long enough to drink and then spend the rest of their time clinging to the soft cloth.
Wow.
But here's the most important part. When researchers introduced loud noises or terrifying mechanical toys into the cage, the terrified baby monkeys didn't run away.
What did they do?
They ran directly to the cloth mother, buried their faces in it, regulated their nervous systems, and then once they felt secure, they turned around and began to boldly inspect the terrifying object.
Wait, really? The physical touch literally downregulated their cortisol.
Yes, it drops the heart rate and shifts the brain out of the fight or flight response. That study proved that physical touch and secure attachment are fundamental biological imperatives, not just nice bonuses.
That is incredible.
In psychology, this is known as having a secure base.
Okay, I see the connection now. These kids in Bali and Japan aren't being coddled. They're being given an impenetrable, secure base.
Exactly.
Because they sleep pressed against their parents, because they're constantly carried, their biological attachment tank is perpetually full. Their nervous systems aren't wasting energy scanning for abandonment.
You don't build a strong, independent adult by forcing independence on a 6-month-old.
Right.
Leaving a baby to cry it out alone in a dark room doesn't teach them self-reliance. It teaches their nervous system that they are isolated in a dangerous world.
That makes total sense.
But when you provide so much security early on through the constant physical presence of the village and the parents, the child naturally wants to step out of their comfort zone.
They aren't afraid of the dirt, the bugs, or the scraped knees.
Right, because they know on a primal biological level that their safety net will catch them if they truly fall.
That completely flips our paradigm. We fear that holding a child too much will make them weak. But this suggests that withholding touch and enforcing artificial boundaries is what actually makes them fragile.
It really does. The attachment is the fuel for the resilience. Toughness doesn't exist in a vacuum. It requires a foundation of absolute security.
It's a holistic ecosystem. The latent life patience allows the parents to tolerate the messy communal village.
Right.
The communal village provides the economic and emotional safety net. And that safety net gives the parents the freedom to let their kids engage in the risky, unstructured play that builds physical and mental immunity.
It all ties together perfectly.
This deep dive has fundamentally challenged how I look at modern life. And honestly, you don't even need to have kids for this to apply to here.
Not at all.
We've explored how skipping the chaotic tutorial of your 20s and waiting to establish your life can grant you a superpower of patience. We've unpacked how our culture's relentless pursuit of privacy and independence has largely just bought us a very expensive form of isolation, whereas shared communal living offers a much healthier baseline for the human nervous system.
And critically, we examine the physical and emotional cost of living inside an air-conditioned box.
Right, the bubble wrap.
By constantly wrapping ourselves and our children in metaphorical bubble wrap, sanitizing our environments, avoiding uneven terrain, and heavily scheduling every waking moment, we are literally atrophying our biological and psychological muscles.
So, you don't have to move to Indonesia or Japan to implement this. You can let the people in your life be profoundly bored. You can take a walk off the paved path.
Absolutely.
We live in a society that is obsessed with optimization. We want to sanitize every surface, mitigate every risk, and curate a perfectly smooth, frictionless existence.
But at what cost?
Exactly. So here is a final thought to mull over. In our hyper-optimized, perfectly scheduled, sterile modern world, what if the ultimate luxury, and truly the greatest gift we can give ourselves and the next generation, isn't a prepackaged, perfectly safe life?
What is it then?
What if the greatest gift is simply the freedom to get a little dirty, face a little failure, and figure it out for ourselves?